Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the video. I'm GetGoodGuy and this is Battlefield 1. Released in October 2016, BF1 is already working its way through the 4th year of its life. An undeniable success for the majority of its time as the current Battlefield title. The question now is it still worth it in 2020? Is it worth going back to it if you've left, or is it worth picking up if you've never played it before? Well, today that's what I intend to try to flesh out, so you can make your own mind up regarding those questions. But one thing is for sure, it was certainly a refreshing experience for myself returning to Battlefield 1 after all this time, having focused upon the less than stellar effort that Battlefield 5 has been so far. And this video will be focused upon the multiplayer aspect of the game, as you can of course play the single player content at any time without any difference. Now, I produced a video of this nature last year also, and with over 81,000 views for that video so far, even when it was 2.5 years after release, there's a clear indication of a sizable number of people still showing interest in this game, with those views continuing to trickle in recent months. We can take that as early encouragement that this game still has something to offer. But last year I focused pretty much entirely upon the actual content and value of the game, which I will cover again today in an updated form, but I also want to improve the product I'm providing. So the latter part of this video will also go through my research into how active the game is now, as that's something I was asked about a lot on the previous video. So I'll cover some things including server numbers, queue times, matchmaking success and such like, so we can really look at whether it's worth your time, not just for the game quality, but for player number viability for good matches. Now, if you are interested or do end up interested in BF1, a quick look around Amazon, the Xbox Game Store, and a number of other outlets shows BF1 is available for purchase for between £10 and £20, which is around 12 to 24 euros and $13 to $26. Pretty good value for a game like this, and honestly you can probably find it cheaper than that if you take some time to look around for it, and especially if you pick up a used physical copy from somewhere. Of course, there's also DLC you can purchase, which depending on your package can have a separate cost to it, but also keep in mind you can just play BF1 using an EA Access or Origin Access subscription, which is likely the best value for money as long as there are other games you're interested in from that service. And so before we get into the quantifiable numbers section, let's cover the more nuanced experiential stuff, actually playing the game. Well, for me, BF1 is all about atmosphere, the visuals, the setting, the audio, the pacing. It genuinely feels like you're in a battle that's part of a larger war. If some of you come away from playing BF1 saying it actually felt like you might be in a game version of World War I, I'd be totally able to accept that, and sometimes that's exactly how I feel. They really nailed the art style and overall feel, which for me, and many others, is in near total contrast to Battlefield 5, where ultimately, at least for most people, it doesn't really feel like you're in a battle most of the time, not a genuine part of a war, and so it absolutely doesn't feel like you're in World War II for most players. So big respect to Battlefield 1 for pulling this aspect off so much better. And I must say that part of this is that there aren't purchasable soldier skins in Battlefield 1. I get why they're in BF5, and I'm overall okay with it. Companies need to make their money and Battlefield 5 doesn't have a premium pass. But not having purchasable soldier skins in BF1 keeps things more authentic, and also means there isn't confusion as to what class the enemy are and what threat they pose. In fact, I think the classes in BF1 are much more easily recognizable on the whole in the heat of the moment, making it easier to decide how to combat them, and those classes feel like they have more defined roles. This also plays into the lack of attrition. There's no running out of the ability to heal, but you do have to wait for recovery, and you don't have an insta-heal option unless you're medic, which actually makes medics really vital but in a less intrusive manner, allowing you to get quickly back into the fight rather than having to hide somewhere to heal up, but also meaning that if you're playing solo or don't have helpful teammates, you aren't suddenly screwed. Then there's the, I believe, larger ammo counts, but no ammo stations, leaving supports being less urgently needed from minute to minute, but extremely welcome when you do get low on ammo and don't have another option. It's a system I personally now much prefer, both when playing solo and in a group. It's team play, but it isn't forced. I also feel that BF1 has generally more compelling weapons, with much more differentiated roles, but not being strictly limited to really narrow ranges of viability, at least most of the time, and more guns actually offer a purpose, plus gunplay with a higher skill floor and ceiling. Now, some will prefer the gunplay of BF5 or perhaps a different Battlefield title entirely, but for me, personally, it's more satisfying picking up a kill in BF1. It requires more, it feels punchier, and although I also liked the gunplay of BF5, the recent changes to recoil and such like just make it feel like you're running around with laser accurate pea shooters. BF1 simply doesn't have this problem. Some weapons are hip-fire monsters, some can 2-tap kill but are only accurate when you're stationary, etc, etc. There are genuine mechanics to learn and master. If that's up your alley, then good for you. You should enjoy Battlefield 1's gunplay. Onwards, and let's quickly cover spotting and visibility. And I'm doing a lot of comparison with BF5 because it's the current title and thus is of most relevance. So in BF5 there have been a lot of complaints about simply not being able to see the enemy. Some like that it's difficult and quote unquote realistic, although I don't think it's entirely realistic to be honest, but either way that's fine. But also, many appear to not like it. Well, in BF1 the soldiers, for me, have a better physical presence. They stand out more against the environment and just feel chunkier, more physically imposing, so they're much more difficult to miss. And of course there's 3D spotting, which has definite pros and cons and will come down to personal preference. As this is my video, I'll give my opinion, and I think it's somewhat more balanced than most for this topic. I like some aspects of the spotting model of BF5, which relies upon mechanics such as flares and suppression. It allows for stealthier play and a better opportunity to pull off flanks. Plus, you know when you're spotted now due to a recent mechanic addition. But at this point, what I like more is simply not having to strain my eyes. Being able to look out across the vast detailed landscapes on offer and press a button or a key to check if it's actually an enemy I'm looking at. This feels like an absolute godsend after playing BF5 for so long. So you can decide whether you like the sound of that or not. Nobody can tell you you're wrong, and it does have a large impact upon how the game plays. But don't count out some other visibility issues that BF1 does have. Very high contrast and brightness overall can be evident. A lot of settings alteration is required for some players, and often those settings don't work well on all maps. Things like super dark corners and incredibly bright effects looking out of windows are near unavoidable. I used to complain about this a lot, but I guess BF5 has made that issue seem less severe. It is however still a problem. And while we're on problems, we don't want nostalgia or rose-tinted glasses to provide an uneven presentation. So there are still annoyances to deal with. This is not suddenly a perfect game just because BF5 hasn't gone well for most players. Planes can still be very powerful and very annoying. Gas can still be irritating and borderline overpowered in how it functions. Ladders often don't let you climb them effectively. Spawns can be awful. In my play session for this footage, I died instantly off spawn twice, as in there was someone standing right behind me like 2 meters back, and that was when I spawned onto a flag, not when I spawned onto a teammate, and I instantly killed an enemy off spawn 3 times. You can add to this that matchmaking with friends can be a pain, seemingly requiring you to only invite your friends once you're in the game, rather than when you're about to search, at least that was my experience on Xbox. But these issues don't detract enough for me from the overall value of the game for it not to be worthwhile. It was incredibly fun to pick up again, and I highly recommend it. And just to quickly throw out a few more things, the team balancer functions better than in BF5, with teams usually having near equal numbers and it actually at least attempting to switch people around sometimes. BF5 lacks this entirely. Scoring points feels much more incentivized, possibly due to better user interface design, superior team play mechanics, and more useful visual feedback. Totaling up points is clear, satisfying, and feels of more relevance than in BF5. It then also feels like you get more frequently revived on BF1, even without squad mates being able to revive you unless they're medics. This is likely either due to there being no long animation to go through to do a revive, unlike in BF5, or because the overall player base left playing BF1 is more capable. And then to add on to the end, BF1 has elites and behemoths, which BF5 does not. Those are powerful infantry pickups off the ground for the elites, and for the behemoths, they're very powerful vehicles that are often provided for the team that's losing. It's going to be totally up to you if you like them or not. And now onwards to some of the key figures from my time researching and testing out the player numbers of BF1, because as I'm sure most of you understand, without a decent player base, a game can run into issues with struggling to fill lobbies, poor connections as players from further afield end up in the available lobbies, long matchmaking times trying to find an adequate game, and other such problems that can seriously detract from your overall experience. So the first thing I did was look for the total player number figures that were available for Battlefield 1, but it looks like those have been removed. Now often that means that a player base has shrunk quite considerably. However, on this occasion, it isn't that clear, and some people speculate that the player base for Battlefield 1 is actually growing, because it's entirely possible those figures are being hidden in order to benefit public opinion of Battlefield 5, the current game, not showing a strong player base for previous titles whilst BF5 flounders, the game they need to make money at the minute. So we'll have to label that one as being unclear, but potentially encouraging. So I dug a bit deeper, and give or take a year ago, some articles were reporting active player counts of 4 million per month for Battlefield 1. Now I doubt that's for unique users, and info from a year ago isn't of huge relevance, of course, but I wanted to see what I could find to try to be helpful, and those figures were still several months after BF5 had released and become the current BF title, with BF5's popularity having almost certainly only continued to decline since then, offering further incentive for players to perhaps switch to some of the older titles. Plus it was around 2.5 years after BF1 released, so it's at least somewhat encouraging again. But I decided to get some primary data as well, so on the 4th of January 2020, I jumped onto BF1 on Xbox One. That was a Saturday, and it was in the afternoon UK time, so pretty optimal playing time for Europe and morning time for the US. So while this is only on one platform, it's at least a decent indicator of what you can expect. So I searched for servers using the server browser that had between 0 and 10 available slots, basically looking for only highly populated and active servers, and there were 41 available, which is a pretty decent number actually, considering some games have 64 players in them. Now of these 41 servers, 17 servers were within Europe, 21 in North America, 3 in South America, and then 0 in Antarctica, Africa, Asia, and Oceania. So if you're in Europe or North America, then you're going to be fine, but if you're from elsewhere, you may have some issues finding a decent game. Now of those 41 available servers for me in the UK, 5 I would have avoided for connection based upon the ping indicator, 19 I would consider on a lesser green bar, and 17 were strong connection servers, which again is pretty solid. But obviously I must re-stress that platform and time zone do affect this. This is just an indicator for you. And I did then realise the next morning though that a comparison with Battlefield 5 could be interesting. Time constraints meant that I had to go for this info specifically in the morning also, so obviously at that time there are likely less active North American servers, for example, affecting the overall numbers, but Battlefield 5 had 91 available servers when searching with those same parameters, which I think makes Battlefield 1 look pretty good. A game that's over 3 years old still has 41 active servers when I checked, compared to the 91 of the current iteration of the series, albeit at a less than optimal time for Battlefield 5. But perhaps you'd like to know which modes were actually viable and being played of those 41 servers on BF1. So there were 0 air assault games, 18 conquest games, 1 domination game, 0 frontlines games, 9 operations games, 1 gamer rush, 2 games of shock operations, 0 supply drop games, 10 team deathmatch games, and 0 games of war pigeons. So if you're interested in the core larger modes of conquest and operations, then you'll be just fine. If you enjoy the smaller mode of team deathmatch, then you're also good to go. 2 or 3 of the other modes may be a struggle at times, and then the more niche modes like supply drop just don't bother. Now I did think, what if I don't use the server browser and instead use the quick search function? So I did that for every game mode, and my advice is simply don't use the quick search. After about 45 seconds to a minute, it put me into a game for every single one, but they were all empty apart from the shock operations game. So just use the server browser instead. Even if you're not used to it, it's not difficult. You just set your search parameters and then select the game you want. It's honestly much better and will allow you to get consistent games on BF1. And with those findings covered, a quick summary regarding player connections. So it's more than possible to find games in BF1 in my experience. Using the server browser is basically mandatory and only certain modes are viable, but there's absolutely the opportunity to play full games of BF1 on a regular basis. However, some players in your lobby likely will have pretty poor connections. This is almost unavoidable due to the somewhat limited number of viable servers, and they are limited to certain regions of the world. So players from more distant areas will be joining your servers without optimal connections. And of course that may also apply to you. If you're from a region where there's generally less play happening on older titles, expect to have some issues with this. And so now, it's up to you basically. That's my coverage. You've heard why I think Battlefield 1 was an awesome experience, and you have at least an estimation of how active the player base is, and how that could affect your play based upon your location and desired modes. So let me know what you think, especially if you end up actually trying the game. Are you interested? Is it fun? And any other relevant details, share them in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and leaving a like would be really appreciated. Subscribe and turn on notifications to catch more content, and feel free to follow my stream and join my Discord server in the description and find my pinned comment. Here's the Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and of course often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters. And let's kick this off with the Assault class, and duh, it's the STG. I'm not sure how I could have picked anything else, and there are two ways of explaining why. The simple way and the more complex way. So the simple way is just to say, look at how many people are using the STG. A basic rule of video games is generally that if something is used to an extensive degree,